I can. So I'll do a brief introduction before you start, if that's
Okay,
okay.
thank you very much.
Good, I'll do it. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ali Kasim. Uh, Today's presentation is by our guest, Dr. Bello Sambo. So I'll just do a brief introduction as is uh, just like traditionally as we've always been doing. So Dr. Bello Sambo is a Nigerian. He obtained his PhD in mechanical engineering at the University of Huddersfield in the United Kingdom. His academic background spans over a decade, including experience in electrical electronics, communications, control, and instrumentation engineering. Dr. Bello's current focus involves commercial academic projects for the railway industry in Europe, America, and Africa. In this seminar, Dr. Bello will discuss issues and solutions regarding harnessing the full potential of developing economies by means of utilizing rail transportation via sustained innovation research and enterprise developments. Dr. Bello, you have the floor. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation.
the pleasure was all mine and will always be. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening to the audience, depending on where you are globally. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, or should I say, Aliyu. Um, so I believe I don't need to dwell on any more introduction of myself, and we could perhaps, if I share my screen, delve straight into the topic of the day. Yes,
We can see your screen.
yeah, that's brilliant. Um, so, as Ali, you mentioned, the topic of discussion is around the potential that developing economies could harness in unlocking many benefits. These potentials come in different packages, innovation, research, and enterprise. And a cocktail of these in a balanced or a proportionate form is what developed economies have used if you look at the history to get to where they are today. Uh, just to give you a flavor of the content of the presentation, I thought I would introduce myself, but I think, like I said, the moderator has done a brilliant job. Um, and then, obviously, a sort of overview or background, um, just to give sort of the context in which we would be looking at these issues. I was thinking we could exploit issues such as the need for rail transportation and how do you, after sort of establishing the need, um, have an impact assessment? How do you quantify how much impact you've gotten from having a rail transportation system? The reason why I thought these could form the background of our discussion today is that we rail enthusiasts have more often than not been accused of being just passionate about having rails, whereas historically rail has been there right from, if you look at in the context of Africa, right from colonial era and 50, 60, 70 years down the line, some of us countries are still looking at the new and perhaps future developments in rail. Um, with these kind of narratives out there, it is important to take a step back and then sort of project why we need it, or how do you assess the need, and then how do you also quantify the impact. And being a Nigerian and also without the bias of just being a Nigerian, knowing that in Nigeria today we have states or regions such as Lagos State or Abuja, Kaduna, that are no doubt by some World Bank studies leading in terms of rail developments in sub-Saharan Africa. I thought it would be wise enough to pick a case study of Lagos State and look into issues such as the governance structure, uh, which has a huge impact in the potential of having rail unlock economic prosperity. There is also the issue of coordination. This is starting right from policy down to the intrigues between government agencies, ministries, departments, and stuff like that. Um, After governance structure and coordination, with this understanding, you can begin to see where bottlenecks or perhaps ease of a broader, wider transportation network could or could not be established. Now, like I said, we are thriving, at least within sub-Saharan region. It will then be wise to also share with my audience today the infrastructure, state of the art in terms of infrastructure, traffic access, and market potential of rail industry in Nigeria, and particularly Lagos State as a case study. Now, one of the very interesting areas when it comes to the rail system is the argument whether rail and rail transportation as a whole is a social project. For many years, the economists and perhaps some engineers believe there is no profitability in railways. Rather, it's a stimulus to the economy. Um, but more recently, especially when we were doing some work for some multinationals, we found out there is an exception where it could be a profit venture business when you look beyond freight and cargo rail services. So even passenger rail has a potential of being more of a business than a social project. And this comes in the form of the development around the transit corridor. So I thought it would be wise to give my audience a flavor of what perhaps seems to be very important for the investor in Africa in terms of railways and uh, maybe the industry as a whole. Because besides just having a railway, I think it is important if we get the value chain of the rail industry come alive in our lifetimes. So fasteners manufacturers, sleepers manufacturers, designers of um, uh, subgrades and profile tuning, grinding, all of these should be activities within our local economy. And finally, in terms of the case study, I thought there should also and always be an outlook for the future. What technology options, what kind of policy drive to keep these ambitions for Africa and indeed the whole world sustainable. So some recommendations in terms of technology, and then to wrap up the whole presentation with a brief some pointers on conclusions, lessons learned from this case study. Like I said, I'll skip the introduction and let's go straight into the meat of the background. Um, you see, unfortunately for we rail engineers, there is this notion once we come in being a blend or a hybrid of engineering. People think on your screen here some of the snippets or screenshots of projects I have seen in within the last decades are the issues we deal with: finite element modeling, wind loads on structures, welding, infrastructure, switches and crossings, or even modeling, multi-body dynamics. You know, but I thought we go out of this, and like I said, we start. How do you decide whether or not to develop a rail project, be it urban or otherwise? There is a bunch of criteria. Uh, there are six basic steps or criteria to follow, and one of these come in as questions. You ask yourself: is there potential or content in terms of supply and demand diagnostic study? And what do we mean by this? You need to really identify problems, prioritize them, and from this list of uh, problems in a prioritized order, you begin to see key objectives of what you want to achieve by having this railway, and what performance indicators will tell you at every stage that your objectives are being met. Um, in this kind of what we call supply and demand diagnostic study, you need to begin to look at issues such as the land use patterns, the trip content, destination origin, origin to destination. What is the travel pattern within the society or the locality of this potential rail project? Uh, uh, Behind all of this, we keep in mind our engineering projects are actually socioeconomic systems. So you need socioeconomic data, purchasing power, uh, how when you look at a project, it's most successful if you look at it as an organism. It's literally like a human being. It needs the basic functions of a human being. It needs to have nutrition. It needs to excrete byproducts. It needs to reproduce itself, have movement or translation from points. Uh, so these are the kind of issues you begin to analyze in terms of a demand supply diagnostic study. Subsequently, from this stage, the next question you must be able to have an answer for is how and this is in funny because a recent just concluded study from I think the World Bank was quite shocking to realize in sub-Saharan Africa there was a disconnect of this very important ingredient, which is the land use, policy, regulation, and planning. Land use in terms of railway is not just about acquiring and securing land for uh, building the rail track. It is more about the policy that from how the land is being used, what future plans the land have, and what regulations govern the land along which a transit rail corridor is to manifest has significant impact in whether that rail project, lives or dies off. So having an integrated where at the beginning of the conceptualization of the rail project, you have the use, regulation, and planning of land use incorporated into the rail project. And more recently, we've sort of come to the understanding it has to also go vice versa. in developing the land use regulations, policy, and planning uh, structure of the locality of these rail projects, you need to think about things like rail projects. Because I'll give you an example that we found out in Lagos State, somehow when the Land Bureau was cooking up its policies and regulations around some arteries and interestingly now, rail transit corridors, there were restrictions that just didn't make sense if you really want a railway to prosper in such a corridor. One of which is the height restrictions of buildings. Um, we noticed the height restrictions were too low in the sense, I think about 6 to 7 floors as limit in an area where you had a rail blue line, or is it the rail red line rail project. And these are limiting because, as we will see in the coming slides, there are in railways, the rail and the train is perhaps the least important aspect of the business of the system. It is the most important in terms of translocation of passengers or goods, but as a business, as a sustainable organism, it's really there's a bit more to it. Now, back to these indicators, the issues that will help you decide if a rail project should proceed or not. There is the concept of investments. It's all about the money. That's what my economists and financiers will tell me. You can do all the maths. Engineering will boil down to is it sellable? Nobody, an engineering product is as good as void if you cannot get somebody to pay for it. I say, well, yes, let's leave that. Is the argument of the chicken and the hen and the egg, who's come first. But yes, so there is the issue of generating investments. You need to look at what are the opportunity costs, what are the alternatives, because easily instead of a rail line, you could have uh, uh, bus rapid transit in that same corridor. The cost will definitely be different. So, what are the investments and opportunity cost of uh, uh, the corridors? Uh, Now, also there is apologies. You need to look at the comparative uh, uh, advantages, critical appraisal of each option, um, sort of a critical appraisal of alternatives, and then uh, also include or consider uncertainties for each case, and then sort of share these in-depth converging findings to the broader team or appreciation of the entirety of the project. It is at this point, if you have more ticks than X's, you have sort of an indication or a thumbs up saying there is a potential rail project here. Um, these concepts and issues that need answering have been represented by a very nice graph. This is like a roadmap to uh, establishing a rail project. I find it easier when things are in graphs like most people do. Um, on the next slide, is the issue when we begin to talk about, okay, so you have your first confidence booster of having a real project. You need to think about the impact. There is this project management team I met at some point, and they used to find it limiting when teams and people think of projects as having an output. We usually look at projects as, have I delivered these aims and these intermediate objectives? And they were enlightening us then that, look, no, the issue is what is called a result chain these days. And the result chain does not stop us at an output. If the project does not then continue on to have an impact case, you show how, well, right from conception, implementation, and commissioning, you must keep track of how it will impact the lives of people, change the economic fortunes of the society. So, in the Handbook of Railways, these brilliant authors came up with the 4A's framework. And the 4A's framework is saying, look, you have to measure um, the following criteria: availability, accessibility, affordability, and acceptability. And each of these, when you look into the meaning, gives you an appreciation of really what your rail project is supposed to be delivering. For example, in terms of availability, this is talking about, does the service have the capacity to sufficiently connect and cover potential ridership area? So when we looked at Lagos State then, we said, well, for these blue and red line urban transit corridors, is it really, for whatever reason, limiting the coverage? Why would 27 kilometers of electrified track, what is the justification? You have to show that there is sufficient coverage. This can be from user ridership data, socioeconomic data. Um, so coverage and connection. Um, One of the very pressing issues in terms of availability in sub-Saharan Africa is that there is usually good first mile connectivity. And by first mile, we mean um, around the transit station, so around the train station within the corridor. You have a lot of connectivity. In Lagos State, we realized at least all potentially live phase of the metro lines had a good integration, good connection between our local Danfo drivers, even though I think Danfo is no longer the case, it's now the BRT terminals. So there was good representation or inclusion of BRT terminals. Uh, there was the Okada riders, even though that has been banned as well. Um, and the Kekena Pep was also quite affluent. I think one of the only things we had a query in uh, the Lagos Metro Line project was the um, pedestrian walkways. There didn't seem to be sufficient pedestrian and bicycle lanes. Uh, but I remember in these discussions they said, well, work in progress. We have trains coming live, we are sure we can make better footpaths and bike lanes. Um, Moving on to the next impact is that of accessibility. In this impact, what you need to be able to confidently answer is, um, look, is there the ability of this rail service to, does it have the ability to link individuals with basic amenities and opportunities? The Even though it has a social inclination here, but the objective of having and unlocking an economy is when you link demand and supply. Uh, Transport transit corridors need to link riders from their abodes or offices to amenities such as hospitals, schools, uh, opportunities for the high-end paying jobs, moving people or goods from the outskirts, the non-metropolitan districts into the metropolis to do some economic value added activity and take them back home at the end of the day. So if accessibility is there, then you can also confidently say you have some impact. The issue of affordability, that is quite the standard where you cannot have um, a project that cannot pay for itself. Now, what this means is, in terms of railways, rails are heavy investments. And with such investment, you begin to wonder, would social pricing, tariffs aimed at being subsidized for society to capitalize on and stimulate, give them more incentive to go out and do value added economic activity, or premium prices to pay for the investment? The investor is trying to recoup his money and make profit, most probably. And this debate has gone on for, but I think the end of the debate came in when it said, well, if your real project is to stimulate an economy, then social tariffs. If you are out to make money as a business, then you charge premium prices. But maybe a combination of both is what the sub-Saharan African region needs at this point in time. It is a bit worrying to say, about my experience working with Lagos as a case study for Nigeria. We also did um, Maputo in Mozambique and Nairobi in Kenya. It was very apparent that despite the real ambitions in these countries, there was no clarity as to what the affordability model will be. Um, Issues like not knowing where the subsidy would be coming if social tariffs were to be adopted were a bit worrying. But I think at the end of the day, some concessionaire and guaranteeing from governments and investors might be the way out of this loggerheads. And finally, the issue of acceptability. This is quite important at the end of the day. Satisfaction levels from the users of these transport modes. It's quite a linear relationship with very sensitive elasticity, to be fair. But let's get more into the meat of this uh, case study. Lagos State, is one of the most populous states in Nigeria. About way back, I said 2006, we were talking about 17 and a half million people. It's looking more like 20 or 30 million now. The city itself um, seems to be 85% focused in the metropolitan area. So you have this sort of uh, locked in development, the congestion and heavy traffic and massive economic activities in the metropolitan area. Um, Part of the reasons for those who know Lagos is the fact that it's a port state. Um, it's got some sort of attractions, uh, and most importantly, I think historically, the country's capital, political capital, originated in Lagos, but eventually has moved. Um, it gives one of the highest GDP in the nation, in the Federal Republic. And for that reason, now when we look back, we are wondering why it is only in the 2022s and 2023s that a rail project has hit quite a vital nerve of the Federation. But better late than never, uh, as some of the background thinking, I don't quite understand, but we will um, dig deep into these issues some more and see uh, some of the findings. So, looking at the structure, governance structure, and coordination, like I said, um, it's quite a heavy investment to have a rail project. Most of the time, it is a PPP, public-private partnership, and if you don't understand your public sector well enough, then you're bound to run into issues. The same way, if the public sector does not really appreciate its private partners. Um, just to give you sort of a graphical representation, in Nigeria, there is quite a tricky dynamics. We've got the federal government and 36 or 35, that's six state governments. Now, all rail projects are conceptualized and sort of mentored by the Federal Ministry of Transport. A typical process in that domain is that you have the rail project being conceived by the federal ministry in the directorate of rail, uh, and you then have to sort of move it into the parliament system, the National Assembly, because in sub-Saharan Africa, these heavy lifted projects come as bilateral loans, uh, sometimes local domiciliary loan structures as well. So the process is that it will go through the National Assembly to seek approval to get the borrowing plans. With the consent of the Parliament or National Assembly, you have the Federal Executive Council. They approve these borrowing plans based on advice from the nation's Debt Management Office. The Ministry of Finance then would give the approval, or more like endorse based on its own intuitive understanding on capacity to pay back these loans. Um, there's also further appraisal by the Debt Management Office, and this is where it gets a bit tricky now. The National Rail Project, conceived by the Federal Transport Ministry will pass through states. And when you get into the state, um, they also have state parliament, state executive council, state um, debt or financial uh, management offices. And in some cases, there is the transport authority of the state. Now, some say because naturally at the state level, the similar procedure that we outlined for the federal uh, um, uh, sort of flow diagram of conceiving and actually having a real project in Nigeria, Lagos state, or any other state will be replicated at the state level. So you have sort of an overlapping, oversighting function. Um, it is perhaps easier when a state is directly charging the process of having a real project. And the first and only time we've seen that is in Lagos State in Nigeria. So it went through the Parliament uh, Executive Council and the Land Bureau, Environmental Planning and Budgeting, all at the state level exclusively. Uh, but the tricky bits was that the financing then couldn't be done solely by the state. And that then created some complications of having to go back to perhaps, say, the Central Bank of Nigeria um, to seek some loans or uh, other multilateral banks. But just to give a flavor of why the governance structure and how it coordinates itself is important. An investor needs to understand these before they indulge in uh, projects. Now, on the right hand side of the screen, I thought from our findings in 2020, no, 2022, 2022, was that one of the most strategic um, governance structure that every state and then federation or country, especially in developing economies, would like to have is a transport authority, preferably if it is also split into, be it a metropolitan or state-wise or regional. And I say this because maybe you're wondering, well, who wouldn't have a transport authority? Yes, but what we are trying to highlight here is that in the case of Lagos State, it was very, very helpful. And perhaps one of the reasons why it is leading in terms of urban transit rails is the unification or collection of all modes within this transport authority. So in Lagos State, this transport authority called Lamata, Lamata is responsible for financing, corporate planning, uh, management and maintenance of rail, road transportation. So the bulk of land transport within the metropolitan area is under one single body, one managing director, with I think answerable to the governor of the state. It was interesting that we could not find this kind of authority in other states, and potentially is one of the reasons why there are no breakthroughs in terms of transit transportation in some other states in Nigeria. We will come back into this for the future slides, but So to quickly run through what I have tried to explain graphically is that the federal ministry conceives the project. Projects are then subject to approval of executive council, and then the parliament sort of stamps, approves the financing mechanism for financial blueprint. Uh, the domestic or entire external borrowings. For national projects, I think we've seen purely external. It's only some of the state projects that have, well, one state project that has utilized some form of domestic borrowing. And that's all within the framework of debt sustainability as outlined by the National Debt Management Office. Um, the federal or state Ministry of Finance will exercise the financial control of this project. In Lagos, like I said, Lamata is the agency that is saddled with the mandate of project implementation. It doesn't stop there. Was the state project, it goes right from conceptualization, financing, and implementation. And from what we've seen, there are prospects that even operations will come from that single entity at state level. And perhaps if I had the opportunity, I would recommend to the federal government that there should be a national transport authority that takes from cradle to grave as far as rail projects are concerned. Um, the main benefit of having this kind of structure and coordination mechanism is that we do not need overlaps and duplications. We've seen it in terms of road, where the state has law enforcement or road traffic enforcement agency, and then we have a federal road safety corps at the federal level. And you begin to wonder who has jurisdiction over who or when or how. Most of the times, to be honest, riders and passengers and drivers and vehicle owners, as far as road is concerned, just get subject to the scrutiny of both uh, uh, agencies. The same has been seen in the waterways. States with waterways and waterways management authorities have had clashes in terms of uh, uh, not right of way, but who has the not priority, who has prejudice over who on the waterways. Now, for the railways, we are beginning to see a potential for this same issue in the sense the Nigerian Railway Corporation is saddled with operations of federal railways. But since Lagos had the nerves and the courage to take on a rail project statewise, Lamata is that for Lagos. And there should have been no problem, but as we'll see in the coming slides, there was a bit of the Red Line project where there's an overlap. The NRC already has a corridor there. Lagos State was planning to introduce a transit red line, it's called. And um, because the constitution says the Nigerian Railway Corporation or federal ministry, which superintends the NRC, has the right of way. Lagos State had to then seek to share that right of way. And it has not manifested yet, but I'm a bit worried as to the sustainability and uh, coordination of this sharing of a right of way. But hopefully they get things right on these issues. Um, Prior to Lamata in Lagos, there was bottlenecks and overhauls. Like I said, conflicts between or overlaps between agencies. Literally, when you look at it on paper, have the same responsibility. Just one is saying it's coming from federal government, while the other is at the state level. There are recommendations out there. Institutional arrangements, when finely combed out, will really go a long way to relieve the system, especially in developing economies where we need the latitude to prosper and really kick ourselves off the ground. Um, Institutional arrangements is one of the key areas where we can begin to ease things. I'll just give a quick example here that because the governor is the chief executive of a state, you want to do, let's say, a rail project, the land you need as a chief executive officer can only be deeded to you by the governor. Can you imagine how busy a governor is? That every single land, whether it's for the transit station, for a pathway or that overhead bridge, some real estate in the corridor, every piece of land having to wait for a governor's signature. That is a bottleneck as far as I'm concerned. There are things, developing economies, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa as a whole should begin to understand um, the more processes and procedures and stringent you are in your uh, um, policy framework, in your process, business process, enterprise process, the more you frustrate your investor, the more you create opportunities for corruption and shortcut seeking. Developed economies have only been able to really enjoy the benefits of good governance, good institutional arrangements by making it as free, um, as stress-free in terms of process. Bureaucracy is limited. There's limited bureaucracy in what you need to do, the steps and the procedure, and the next person you need to get this signature or that approval. So uh, sometimes I think our policymakers, our governments, our governors and presidents should have this at the back of their minds. Yes, don't make it too uh, lackadaisical, where any whimsical concussion can come out of our institutional arrangements and coordination mechanisms. But the easier it is, the more you facilitate growth and development. Um, on this slide now, we've come to uh, another key governance structure, which is the Land Bureau, responsible for land policy, regulation, and use and planning. It's quite a basic one, so I wouldn't waste much time on this slide. But to just drive home some of the things I was talking about when it comes to land use, that the governor is in charge of the land. He assigns and approves the use permits and deeds and stuff like that. You see, the processes are quite clear, and I think the rail sector in developing economies gets the benefit of the doubt. I've not seen a case study where the survey and key informant interviews or data acquisition process has hinted us that getting land for development work is a problem. or has been a problem. But some of the key issues, like I said, was the regulations in the transit corridor, because one of the mistakes I think we are making in Africa at the moment is that we have had our land policy use and plans long established before we thought of things like rail development, urban mass transit developments, bus rapid transits, and the likes of that. And you see some really unrealistic regulations. Like I said, the floor number of floors in some corridors was just not making sense. You want more, you want to attract more and get more land value capture uh, in your corridors of transit. So there should be no reason, engineeringly possible or impossible reason to have such constraints. 10 floors in the transit corridor is not impressive by any standard. Another issue was the floor area ratio, how much actual building size, uh, floor area vis-a-vis the land area. At 30%, I think Lagos is being stingy with its land development floor area ratio. And then uh, the train stations building regulations affected train transit stations, BRT terminals, um, for a population of getting to 30 million in Lagos, with about 21 million in the metropolitan area itself. There has to be more dynamic, more uh, uh, predictive, and perhaps more informed building regulations and stuff like that. But we will not go into too much detail. Let's now see for ourselves the beauty uh, in terms of light rail that Lagos has. Lamata in 2009 conceived what you see on my screen now, which is the about six lines of light rail and one monorail. In 2009, when this project was conceptualized, the plan was to deliver this in about was it definitely less than 10 years. It has gone on for well more than 12, 13 years. It doubled delivery expectation. And um, even though we consider it some progress, the current uh, situation is that the blue line, which is one of these six lines, has been split into three phases, and one phase has been delivered, which is from National Theatre to Mile 2. Um, Two other phases are being one under concessionaire, trying to figure out who will uptake this. The CCECC in China was responsible for the phase one. It was, I think, it's under testing as we speak, and it should be open hopefully anytime soon. The red line is also work in progress. Engineering works are very much active. It is anticipated that the red line might even come on with full or close to full potential earlier than the blue line, even though it's only been works there have only been for no more than 2 years or so. Um, we go into a bit more details on this slide regarding the entities, what the infrastructure is like, what is happening. And this is where we will also begin to identify some detailed or in-depth engineering planning issues. financing issues that I think developing economies are susceptible to and will need a better strategy to avoid such delays. Now, on the blue line, we have this wonderful 27 kilometers of um, electrical multiple units. The rail track is a third rail track. It's 12 substations along these 27 kilometers. It has 13 stations, 13 transit stations. Um, and like I said, the first phase, which is about 12 kilometers of this 27, is from the Maltu to National Theatre. There is about 3 rolling stocks on ground, 3 electrical multiple units, 3 sets of how many, I think about 10 maximum cars. The daily ridership predicted for the Blue Line is about, at full capacity, about 1 million passengers per day. Um, but I think if you remember from the previous slide, the red and blue line have this little, I think it's from mile 2 to Marina, where they would practically be sharing that corridor. So it was interesting where the first sign of an engineering works issue was that we were surprised to find out on the red line, diesel multiple units were being deployed. So DMUs rather than electric trains. This would move from Lagos Marina to uh, Abeokuta in bordering Ogun State. Um, and the question was, okay, so what happened? How do you move from an electrical train technology concept trucks and switch into a DMU? And interestingly, the Lagos State Transport Authority and the Commission Ministry, State Ministry said that was where the right of way issue, that in that corridor, they noticed the Nigerian federal government had already a national corridor from Lagos to Ibadan. Um, and it was diesel multiple unit, it was not non-electrified. They thought it was cost saving for them to share that corridor. It will save them building at least a few kilometers of new track. All they would need would be sidings. If I go back to the previous slide, on the red line there, what you will see is that they will just need sidings to these stops starting from Marina, ending at Agbado Depot. They will just need sidelines to go into the red line transit stations and utilize most of the NRC existing track. Now, the financing bits, after what became apparent to us that there would be, it's unnecessary complication having 2 different technologies that will require this sort of round the clock or almost round the clock transit for people, and with such a being a commercial now, having contradicting technological outlook within the metropolitan uh, light rail system just didn't sit well with experts. But then I think once you look into this slide and you begin to see the financing and government funding structure, it begins to make sense. Um, the central bank had put in some intervention funds as back as 2015-ish, and Lagos State was quick to take advantage of that. But naturally, that is not enough. Um, the bulk of the investment was from the state's internally generated revenue. We all know Lagos has a huge belly of internal revenue. Um, but primarily, one of the biggest lessons or the lessons learned from not having a very clear financing mechanism is that projects get delayed. Um, Lagos State has expressively told us during this work in last year, was it 2 years ago, that funding has been a major stumbling block in delivering this rail project. They had double delivery time and even shortened the phased delivery. After about double the time uh, they promised to deliver LRCs, today we have, after 12, 13 years, almost 15, that only a phase. But these are, we learn along learning by doing. That's what we say. Um, so what is, the recommendation of um, Washington, World Bank, the IMF, uh, in terms of financing? There needs to be a dedicated agency. We have an example in the United States where um, the what's it called now? Transit Administration Office, Federal Transit Administration Office, gives financial and technical assistance to regional projects. If you could have something like that um, from the federal government, but then its tentacles is dwelling down into state level support, state level technical and financial support. That would be nice. But you see, at the end of the day, we thought um, heavy offtake projects like rail and bus rapid transits, BRT terminals, and systems is best financed by multilateral loans. Um, and inside, it does come with its complications, and inside information of experientially, what I know is, yes, multilateral loans tend to have bias in what kind of projects they invest in. I see it more realistic, a multilateral bank funding a bus rapid transit in developing economies than a real project. But at the end of the day, my argument is usually, look, it's more of the business argument. Investments and loans will naturally flow to quality business arguments, ideas, concepts, business development uh, outputs. So yes, biases, but still, I think bilateral loans are the way to go. Now, this was also an interesting concept and finding, because earlier, if you remember, I touched on the issue of profitability. What is the purpose? Is it a business? Is it a social project? Um, in either case, whether you're out for profit or trying to stimulate growth in the economy, there is a concept of transit-oriented development. And later on, more importantly, in the case of developing economies, we coined up a reverse analogy saying, no, 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 no. It's what we need is development oriented transit. What is TOD and DOT? TOD, DOT, these are concepts that allow you as a nation or a state to capitalize on transit corridors and services and stations to facilitate developments within those corridors. Um, it is no surprise that on a highway, on a bus corridor, on a rail corridor, you find commercial activities, formal activities, informal activities, trading, um, housing, real estate. Um, it really boils down to anything, but you know a transit corridor is live when you see associated development springing up in that corridor. Um, so really the fastest way to kickstart or take benefit of a rail and any other transit corridor is the developments that will come out of having that corridor functional, effective, meeting the criteria that we initially talked on whether to go on with the project or not. Um, and with TOD, the idea is issues like how connected is your transit station? How accessible is it? What other modes of transport are intertwined within a transit location? I think international development program. I can't remember the reference, but there was a reference that has given an extensive model to assess the potential. How much potential would location A, transit location A, or B or C have? Because there are little design, um, operational customization, let me put it that way, that would, could, and should be employed for TOD to manifest in places it's intended to be. So, looking more narrowly into the Lagos case study, oh, well, before I say that, I think just to give a more uh, descriptive analogy of transit-oriented development is when you go to developed economies. I remember when I first got to the UK or where, and you begin to notice you come out of a train station or a bus station, and you are literally within a minute, 2, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, a couple of minutes to perhaps everything you would need. The mall is somehow right there, sometimes in the station itself. Um, the parks and other attractions are literally around the corner or coming out of the tube. The hospitals are there, the schools are there. And if you think deeper, you can imagine where if you have your housing estate, your real estate, your uh, last mile requirements within minutes of a transit location. And it's no coincidence. This is by design. And that is what transit oriented development is. It's the developments are oriented around the transit corridor, the transit station. So looking in Lagos as a case study, we found out, unfortunately, because to be fair, uh, because BRTs were there before any real plans and progress was made. Potential for TOD was more anchored around the BRT terminals. Uh, and BRT terminals were the anchor, the pivots of TOD. Uh, and it is because, you have, like I said, the Kekena peps, the bus, the pedestrians, the bike, uh, and when you go to interesting stations like that of the marina, where the ferry terminal is intermodally connected to the BRT, and you've got now the marina train transit station coming up. So there are some potential locations of TOD in Lagos State. I think, I'm not sure if our report for the World Bank on this work has officially been published on the open source, but we were able to rank some locations, especially those that Lagos State government wanted to be transit-oriented development uh, locations. Um, but along the line, like I said, we had to coin a different concept. It's not new, but it's one of these adaptations that you have to make based on peculiarities. What we noticed is that in sub-Saharan Africa, in developing economies, either these alternative transit modes have been abandoned over time because indeed we have at least national rails, cargo, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, over 1,500 kilometers, um, and from ports in Lagos up to Kano, granite pyramids of colonial days, that were abandoned pre-post independence, and maybe due to neglect or the fact that it wasn't strategically incorporated in our master plans. Um, Unfortunately, our transit today, the reality in developing economies is that um, it is the transit that has to be oriented along the developments in the corridor. So this is an important concept for transport authorities like Lamata, like the federal and state ministries of transportation, to really understand. You cannot, it is more difficult to uh, force your development along the transit corridor. It's easier to sort of induce the transit to suit the development of existing uh, regions, states, metropolitan areas. Um, this discrepancy, I think, would be very much obvious right from the cost of the project. I could only imagine if Lagos State was to, for the blue line or the red line, demolish through the corridor and spring up new developments. Uh, Things are already quite mature. Non-destructive reorientation is perhaps a way to go. It's like in real maintenance, we'd rather non-destructive testing than a destructive one. So the potentials of TOD, or DOT are basically the same. We need a master plan uh, um, that incorporates multimodal transportation. It should also incorporate um, the land use regulations and plans, and then the coordination mechanism, making sure a governance structure with swift coordination, but most importantly, uh, a condensed or combined transport authority, the same agency responsible for roads and airports and seaports should be responsible for rail and have a shared vision. Uh, it's a continuum. Transportation is a continuum. This segregated approach will just do no good for developing economies. In terms of technology, we have discussed earlier the contradiction of um, is it renewable energy? Are we having diesel uh, units on the network? Combination of both. Um, what does that mean for the future? I personally don't think the red line would be sustainable in the long run if um, at least 5 out of 6 of the metropolitan light rail system is uh, electric. It's bound to be uh, phased out. Um, so, but engineering, the beauty of engineering and sciences is that there's always a way out. We then said, look, potentially then focus on bimodal units, uh, hybrid trains, hybrid infrastructure. Um, it leaves room for unlocking potential for the future when things change or are better or worse. We can adapt around hybrid systems. Um, in any case, having these hybridization um, tendencies gives you flexibility. You could imagine, I saw it as it would be very nice if on the blue line starting from uh, mile 2 to National Theatre or National Theatre mile 2, if we could have BMUs that would literally be able to then transit and move onto the red line. So, and single train that can move around the whole stretch, despite these basic or fundamental differences. Um, Now, Lagos is busy. It's active. It doesn't sleep. A million passengers per day is no joke. We think issues like the CBTC communication-based train control are more realistic. They are more capable of meeting the demand. Um, you know, from a strictly wheel rail interface perspective, traction braking, um, volume of passengers being potentially to be moved. Um, we need optimized traction and braking systems. Safety is definitely one direct relationship I can link to um, high-end traction braking systems. Um, it's the rails have not been there for years, decades. Um, it will take more than orientation and you know over time before health and safety around trucks, especially electric trucks. Um, just the rolling stock itself. We need very effective communication between trains, very effective passenger and bystanders, warning systems, information systems, um, the issue of wheel slip, um, you know, this is a safety issue in the sense braking distances, stopping at transit stations. I remember, I think it's an Arcadis project in Canada where the uh, no, well, I stand to be corrected. I don't remember what exact project it is, but I do remember not long ago we had this issue where, the transit trains that move you in airports from terminal to whatever. And they had the problem where it was one of those cascaded uh, doors and entry. The train will come, but because there was some adhesion slipping issues, the braking distance, braking positioning was offset from the doors, and passengers would come and struggle to find the right door to get out onto the platform uh, to the next flight or whatever. And it's funny, but not funny that the friction coefficients, the adhesion traction system, were the things that had to be investigated and sorted out just for a train to stop at the right place for passengers to go on and off. Um, these kind of things, and if you take it a little bit deeper, you begin to think about the bogie configurations, um, wheelbases, what kind of axle loads are we talking about? Because there are studies that have shown the configuration has an impact on the noise level. Motored bogies that are put at the trailing axle uh, have lower dB noise levels than when you have um, bogies with the motor in the leading axle. These kind of things are not negligible in a climb where energy generation and availability of energy is still something uh, being worked on and continuously being worked on. I think technology development in the rail sector should be harvesting electrical energy from the system, conserving energy, which should not be questioned. Um, what are the challenges of realizing these potentials and outlooks, technological outlook? What barriers might we have? It's about skills. Um, Often I've said to audiences like yourselves that gone are the days of where education was like cast iron in the 70s, 60s, 50s, and perhaps any time prior to that you look into education was more like cast iron. Once you had it, you had it. It was like a shield. You see, there's so much information, knowledge out there today that education is more like your perishable vegetables in the fridge. Believe you me, if you don't bring it out, wash it, air it, and treat it constantly, continuously, uh, seeking information, knowledge, exposing yourself, linking, exposing yourself to new ideas, new information, new knowledge, but then also linking the interconnectivity. Because we used to joke that, look, to be the best engineer at some point, you will need to know some biology. To be the best engineer at some point, you need to know some philosophy, some uh, arts and humanities. In fact, there's some religion. It is all connected at different levels, and perhaps that's what professorial status is. I like to think of it as that way. That these are people who have linked one or more connected multiple domains of knowledge and information. So upskilling, continuous skilling within developing economies is critical. Uh, we should be able to organically grow the skills needed within the rail industry and the transport industry at large. Um, uh, you know, about vocational training, vocational skills, design, but I wouldn't delve into it because I was going to say for me, designs are standard now globally. The designs, the cost of the designs, it's a benchmark. Um, One of my professors used to say, look at your cars. They are fine details different, but they are basically the same designs. Look at your planes, the laptops, the mobile phones. There's a standard out there, and even their costing, their pricing, there is a limit to how much you can charge for cars globally. There are fine details about how much technology is in there, and for each cup of categories, it's the same. So design is not really my worry for developing economies. It's getting the skill, quickly upskilling ourselves to be able to get involved with the broader issues. Well, it's been a good couple of minutes towards the end. Things are getting interesting. So quickly, I will try to sort of bring these issues that we've discussed, that we've seen the case study of Lagos. We understand the challenges, the issues, and the potential prospects. Um, we have identified some very key structures that need to be in place. I am proud, and indeed, Nigerians should be proud. The most, if not all, the case studies that I have seen in sub-Saharan Africa should be proud of themselves. The basic or fundamental structures for a good transport network seems to exist in sub-Saharan Africa. Um, the major issues are the financing and funding mechanism, um, the detail of engineering project design, um, the soft issues that really bring it to life are the transit-oriented development, development-oriented transit. Um, these kind of studies, potential for the transit-oriented development study, more detailed engineering design, and a very, very, very strong financial or funding mechanism. But the pillars are there. There could be some more work to make it effective. Metropolitan, even beyond metropolitan transport authorities that oversee the entire sector is very key. And also, land use policy plans should be an incorporated process into the Transport Authority cadastre. Um, Often, I think having them as okay, state-wise, national-wise, they could be two separate entities, but within the Transport Authority, there has to be same way every structure, every governance structure would say there's an IT department, there's a human resource department, there has to be land use policy, regulation, and planning representation within every transport authority in sub-Saharan Africa. Because once we get it right from that level, then things will really, really be much easier moving forward. Um, yeah, so we've spoken about the engineering works, bridges, yards, uh, transit infrastructure, the permanent way infrastructure need more detail, master plans with rail master plan, strategic master plan as well. So it's coming there. We are most likely going to get it right. It's about the doggedness and perseverance on some of the issues that are naturally uh, overlooked. Uh, we've given quite an extensive insight or detail. Of course, we know the what's it called? PPP structures are what is happening all across. That is absolutely fine. There's we tend to get a lot of advice from multinationals or bilateral funding sources that models in developed economies, the public sector handles the infrastructure and private sector handles operations. We have seen that model be reversed in Great Britain, where GB Rail has now taken over, including operations. Um, so it's a dynamic thing. What works depending on the case may differ. I think PPPs are still very lucrative for Africa. The ECC from China has done an amazing job in design, build, and operate, then transfer, at least in Nigeria for federal projects and even the Lagos State metro lines. The fares need more work. It's about operational model. Seems to be some ambiguity or inconsistency. Clarity, there's more clarity required in terms of operational models. I've seen this confusion. The model does not clearly state to you if it's a social project or are you inviting concessionaires to operate trains and make money out of it. Either of the two has been done. We've seen Japan has one of the only profitable or the most profitable rail venture. There's a model, there's a way they did it. Maybe on a different platform, we'll talk about how to make railways profitable. And we've seen subsidies in England and most of Europe, Asia, for stimulating the economy. How do we, on a final note, the quickest way to get transit-oriented development or development-oriented transit. For Lagos State, I think it was recommended there needed to be a combination of compact redevelopment. We know Lagos is already tight, as they say, but compact development, reclamation of lands, decentralization of congestion, uh, you know, private sector driven initiatives to ensure consistent funding. And funding, when I say funding, I mean funding of the uh, uh, developments around the transit, not funding the rail infrastructure and stuff like that. Yeah, so rapid redevelopment and land value capture around transit and BRT corridors. I think with this, that's the last slide, and I'll let the moderator take over to see if we have some more time for any more discussions, talks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yes.
such a breathtaking presentation. So I would like to ask from the audience whether there are questions. Okay, before anyone, I think, Doctor, I have a little question, and it's about, this very interesting discussion that you brought about. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I hope
Yeah,
you can hear me
yeah.
too.
The very interesting discussion about the actual. So I mean the revenue model, or the cost model that
Yes,
we apply in order to recuperate the investments that has been made, whether it's social tariffs or a more capitalist inclined tariff that
yes,
is more realistic, that's, within the quickest possible time you're able to get the ROI.
yes,
So my question, somehow it's an extension to that, to say that what is the actual cost of the railway infrastructure, the actual cost. So uh, how do you define, costs for railways? The infrastructure, the maybe you have to do demolitions. Do all of these come into the spectrum of costs?
yes. Yeah, so if I get the question right, I think the best way to describe the cost of a rail project would be, first of all, it's the land value and the opportunity costs along that rail corridor. So, like you said, there might have been buildings there, piping infrastructure for, say, the oil and gas industry, or water boards, or electricity. Uh, but most commonly, I think what we have seen is the most common interruption was along landed properties, housing, stuff like that. That's one aspect of the cost. And then obviously the engineering works to prepare these acquired lands, uh, basic civil works, preparing the substructures, any bridges, overhead ones or ground ones. And of course, then you begin to look more into the rolling stock and track costs, the steel, the bolts, the nuts, the fasteners, the rail pads, the ballasts, the rolling stock itself. In the case of the third rail or pantograph catenary, you look at electrification costs, then communication and signaling costs, and then operation costs. Because you need to man all of these at the end of the day, the train driver, the signal system, operations, the substation engineers, the track engineers. So you got operational cost, the infrastructure cost, and land value and opportunity of the land costs. When you total all of these, of course, I think personally the infrastructure is the most expensive, because when you begin to say a simple 60 kg switch and crossing set is well above the £60,000 mark now for a single cast. 18 meters of rail, let's say UIC 60 profile, is costing no less than a couple of thousand, tens of thousands of pounds. The other associated cost, of course, is the maintenance cost and operational costs. I don't think I have details of that on me or with me. But yeah, these are the kind of costs, and how they all add up. And like you mentioned, that's what then sort of guides you towards what kind of tariffs you would come out with. To be fair, I think it's quite a cliche. The reality is there is no capitalist rail ticket pricing. You cannot, there's nowhere in the world you can charge um, ticket prices based on the costs of the rail project. The subsidies or the compensation for that, there's always subsidy, but we still call it capitalist if the investors are um, willing to use other revenue streams to show up their reserves. So they might capture the value of the land, which we all know doubles, triples, quadruples, because there's a transit rail corridor now along or around that land or site. So land value capture is one example, and there's a couple of others, but maybe not for today. I hope that answers your question.
It does, it does. But now it makes me want to ask another one.
Yes.
So from your own perspective, what do we need to do in the medium or long term to what one or two things, what are the necessary steps that we can take now to, in the next 10, 15 years, see railway tracks all over Nigeria? One time I was discussing with someone, the model where, for example, there's more private sector investment in terms of the rolling stock, and then the government just focuses on doing the tracks and laying the tracks and putting in the signaling infrastructure, and so that we have less burden on the government parts, so that they have more money, more resources to do more of the tracks, and then private entities come in with the rolling stock, and then they pay for the track, for using the track.
Yeah.
So what kind of models do you think, can you give like a brief assessment of the current model, and what kind of modifications do you think we can adopt? And then afterwards, uh, maybe I don't know if you can see from the chat other questions from other members,
Oh,
other
okay.
attendees. Thank you so much, sir.
Sorry. I'll try to pull up the any conversation from the chats. See the in terms of what's it called the model in terms of operational model and potential of having more extensive rail in Nigeria. I think um, okay, let's start from what it is now. At the moment, we have a contractor financial sort of agreement. Uh, Finances bring in some money or most of the money, and then they bring in their contractors from their ends. Um, they build, operate, then transfer. Um, this model, I wouldn't say it doesn't work, but my problem with such a model is that the liability of these loans are not clear in terms of what guarantees the loans come with. Also, not just the guaranteeing of the loans, what are our, you see, what is our prospect? How feasible are these projects in terms of long-term sustainability and um, returning enough revenue to offset the loans? The idea is we need a more productive economy um, to be able to confidently be attractive to these kind of investments. Now, for that, you know, takes us. This will deviate us a little bit, but I think it will be a good 2 minutes. The Nigerian economy is anchored around petrol dollars. Petrol dollars are exclusive to the populace, as far as I'm concerned. How many Nigerians are working in the oil and gas sector? I can promise you it's not more than 20,000, 30,000. Let's give them benefit of the doubt. 50,000 Nigerians are actively engaged in one thing or the other in the oil sector. But 90% of our forex earnings, our income, uh, uh, import export portfolio is from that sector. So there is this false mirage that the activities of the economy, the things you would see everybody, majority of Nigerians doing when they go out of their homes, is not what represents the export regime of the country. Yet, that is what dictates the model of financing the budget, the capacity to attract investment and loans and uh, potentially pay them back. Now, where is this going to? This means uh, um, the investments are not organically connected to the social economy, the people and the economy. That is why we are inflationarily pressured because the structure, the size of the economy does not match the activities of the economy. For the billions of dollars we are getting, we are not putting in billions and billions of effort. The effort is not justifiable. There's a mismatch. Now, that is what makes the whole thing very complex. And one of the ways we can, or I think, to turn around these complications is that um, let's not dwell on getting contractor financial loans or just loans at the external or internal borrowings. Invest the loans or the borrowings externally, internally to the bare minimum to a Jakarta Steel Rolling Company, Kasina Steel Rolling Mill. Let's develop the value chain. Let's get enough of our steel mined, processed, rolled, casted. Let's get enough skill, vocational skill. Let's get enough rail pads and slippers and aggregates for substructures and ballasts and what have you. Internally, develop the capacity to do it, even though it might not be as efficient and what's the word? Very um, qualitative. It might not be the quality of when we export railways to Nigeria. Import railways to Nigeria. Um, but developing the value chain, the little activities of making the clippings, and somebody is an expert in fastening, the other one is at bending, the other one is at thermal treatment of the roller. So another bunch, the whole neighborhood, all they do is cast slippers. And these other neighborhood are into turning wheel profiles, uh, organically grow the skills and the capacity and go out and do it. There was a time one of our ministers did 7,744, was it jobs or palliatives or something? When I saw that, I thought to myself, if only we will take those number of people from each local government, you come out and get a skill in the rail industry and use some of the resources that we have to build from your local government to the next, the track required, and we will link the country instead of subsidizing uh, 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 crude petrol or diesel. So it's about organically growing capacity and deploying that capacity. And over time, we become more efficient, more proficient. It's like when you look at the history of how the American railways was built. It started from World War One. Post, tremors of war, they came out. Normal citizens like you and I, literally, will go out and work on the train tracks. And so even though we had the complex of, uh, you know, the dynamics of racial and whatever complications, not delve into that. But so organically growing the value chain and deploying that value chain until it catches on. I think that's my take on how we could do it differently, long term, better. So I'll read. I see here on the screen there's you mentioned how the areas along the rail corridor gets developed eventually, using Lagos, which is congested as a case study. Although the current approach of building a rail on existing developments. Mm, what's the possibility of using rail to disperse the population in a congested area such as yes. Oh, naturally. You see, what rail will do, and especially you remember when we were talking about the impacts, the 4 A's, and also questions you will need to ask yourself before you can confidently justify a rail project. It's about connection uh, and how much uh, uh, you can spread the reach of the network. So indeed, if and in Lagos, what I'm hoping is that they don't focus because I was scared for a minute that when I told you the blue line was broken into phases, I was scared the that was an attempt to just focus on the happening economically happening areas. That will be a mistake. I I strongly believe it's about equity, equal opportunity to spread the connection and access to outskirts, low income, uh, metropolitan, high income areas need to be connected. And once there's that connection, you do not need to worry about uh, decongestion. I'll give you an example in on Kaduna Abuja trail line. When things were really, because I've just been on that when I had come for holiday. I found it a bit worrying. It's about 3 hours now to ride from Abuja to Kaduna, which used to be an hour and a half. Um, but even at 3 hours, I can promise you what I've seen on that network is more of people living in Kaduna going to work in Abuja. And some of the little inquiries we are having now from other states, private investors, most of them are looking to capitalize on states like Nasarawa State, which is very close to Abuja. People can easily work there and live there and go to Abuja. People can exploit that corridor with developments and agricultural hubs and educational hubs, and so once you have the effect, the impact of a rail project fully established, issues like congestion and developments, they just fall in naturally. You barely have to do some work. Where you see work having to be done on developments in transit corridors or decongestion is when 90% of the time the planning phase, the conceptualization has missed out issues like I was trying to mention. The land use policy needs to be at the back of whoever is conceiving rail projects right from day one. But when they miss something like that, or someone that is conceiving the project is failing to really appreciate that he needs to have at all times eagle eyes on um, sectors like the road transport, the waterways, and aviation, that's when you begin to see extra work being required to induce development or uh, disperse and decongest metropolitan or even state uh, regions. If I take this, probably the last one from what I see, question before maybe there's anything to be said. Thank you for mentioning. You mentioned that government should help fund some private projects. It's easy to give example with the American government, but my question is, do you think that will be possible with Nigerian government considering all factors? Well, you see, I like to tell people Nigeria is not some special or weird or different or complex thing. Um, I used to remember when one of our professors mocked a former military head of state who said they've received, let's say, some policy guidance from IMF or whoever to devalue the naira, do this or that. They're doing it, but this country is just not obeying economic laws. No, rather it's the contrary. It is the critical thinking. It is the critical thinking that really makes the difference. Um, there's nothing that should be different or difficult because it's in Nigeria. The issue is more how robust and deep we are willing to drive the issues and the policies. I'll give you an example. Why shouldn't there be, or why should anyone be jittery about a government agency to support technical and financial assistance to states? It's about having the right structure, the right policy framework, the right oversight. One thing I used to grumble about Nigeria is, look, so it's mostly in Nigeria where people are appointed or required to monitor people. You employ somebody to make sure somebody is not corrupt. I find that ridiculous. People are susceptible to a lot of vices. Who will then watch the watcher? That person that is watching next. Is that how you keep employing somebody to watch somebody? And before you know it, you will have somebody to watch our president, somebody to watch the ministers. Then uh, that person that is watching the president, you need to employ somebody to watch him so he doesn't. It's ridiculous. We have come to an age and time where technology does it for us. Remove human interference as much as possible. Let systems and computers and let's see who will at least to bare minimum interfere with that. It's easier to mess with fellow human beings' head and uh, get him to connive or threaten or whatever. Programs and artificial intelligence and uh, robust structures, rules, physical policies, that is the way forward. And with that, I really think, yes, Nigeria could have stronger institutions that do better support to the issues. So, Mr. Moderator, I'll hand over back to you if there's anything else. Hello? Hello?
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Hello? Yes, I can hear you now.
There's one last question.
Okay.
Let me.
Yes, thank you, Doctor, for a very good presentation and for that insightful lecture. I want to ask, and a lot of things come into my mind as you present the blueprint of railway network. I want in the aspect of Africa as a developing country,
Yes.
and we have a lot of challenges with regards to insecurity that has to do with the train system and all that. I want to ask, what
Yeah.
is the best management practices in the world that is used to secure trade and that Africa can adopt in the light of Nigeria as a developing country to be able to sustain the rail industries in Nigeria as it grows?
Yes, I like that question very much because it's something that comes up usually here and there, and the answer might be a bit shocking. The standard industry standard in terms of securing rail assets, investments, rail operations are practically not as complex as most people think. For example, I think if you take in the United Kingdom, you see a combination of three things. It's about an effective signaling system with the communication-based train control, where trains talk to each other and talk to a server or a brain box that coordinates the movement, it regulates the flow. Um, but that on its own is a standard practice. Even here in Nigeria, we have a form of that. In Africa, we have a form of uh, control systems for the train network and what's it called? The signaling system. Um, I think what the rest of the world has done a bit different that is yet to come here is this big data information hub they have created around the transit corridor. So all around the stations, at junctions, at civil, primary civil locations, tunnels or bridges, they have a humongous amount of data collecting sensors. Sensors right from your Wi-Fi signal on your phone down to the CCTV cameras in around the station, in around the train, rolling stock itself. The onboard entertainment system, the um, uh, driver feedback uh, systems. Now, the big data is all centralized, processed, and now with the help of uh, uh, text recognition, speech recognition, and what have you, these data are processable real time. So security reports um, tend to get some contribution. And of course, don't forget the general policing, civil policing, uh, criminal, and perhaps even terrorist cyber and all cyber and physical terrorism policing and structures. So for me, you see, it's about having, like I said, science and technology dominate these issues. Once they are dominated, then using good brains and good ideas to harvest the information, the data, the knowledge they capture, you process that and sort of have it inform the the big picture, the top management, the big uh, In Nigeria, the railway corporation should have, I'm sure they have the security and whatever division unit or outlook that should be fed by highly sophisticated artificial intelligence and data collection, big data hubs. Data collected by these technologies intelligently, quickly processed, and then be fed as real life, real time data to top management of operations and security in the hierarchy of things. Um, peculiarities about Nigeria, let's be a bit more in depth. You can have 10 miles, 10-kilometer stations, but not stations physically, not mounting police checkpoints and soldiers. Just yesterday, day before, I was hoping to go and do this presentation, this discussion with all of you from Abuja and do a few other things. I got the ticket and I had to take a very deep breath because I'm not sure if you are aware, there's this warning, circular warning from DSS or the SSS office about warnings about a possible attack on Abuja Kaduna train. That bandits, terrorists have issued a threat sometime from around 11th of August that any moment from now they could potentially attack the train. And I had to postpone just last night, and I began to think to myself, why are we in this level? Because those that are more brave than me went on the train, and one of them called me or no texted me last night saying, there is you see soldiers on along outside on the train tracks at some point, that they have posted soldiers with guns and policemen. In my head, I said, this is wrong. What? Well, that is a very crude way of doing it. It's very crude. Sophisticated systems now have virtual checkpoints, virtual monitoring. Little children play games and fly drones like toys, while serious economies will use that same drone to monitor 10 kilometers of train track and train moving at 120 kilometers per hour, because these drones will fly at that speed and watch everything with a live video feed going as high as a few up to 1,000 meter high in the air, giving you aerial coverage. You image process that kind of image. You see these terrorists before they know they can be seen. You deploy strategic warnings, strategic physical assets based on well-informed data collected using high technology. I think that is the way forward. This approach of dropping physical personnel along tracks, or some of you, if you know that Abuja Kaduna train, they started building walls, literally concrete wall in between Kaduna Abuja, 200 kilometers. Somebody is trying to build a wall to protect the train. That is ridiculous. It's time they give people with a little bit more creativity, more commitment, superior understanding, superior knowledge, superior intellect, superior purpose. Unless we do that, we really are just joking. I hope this gives you some insight to some of the thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for the answers to the questions and the insights you've shared. I think we've exhausted all the questions, I guess. Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you very much. You've been a wonderful and patient audience. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. The discussions have been most interesting.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So since we have no other questions, I would like to thank, on behalf of all the attendees, appreciate Dr. Sambo for giving us some of his time and sharing his presentation and some of his thoughts with regards to railways in the developing economies, and with Lagos in Nigeria as a case study. Thank you so much for this presentation, and that will be all from our side. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right, thank you.